Hey there everyone, welcome back to the channel. For a while I have been promising you guys a video about the stats for banners in 2019 and how IS did overall. Well, this is the culmination of a lot of freaking data, all of which I have made by hand, entered by hand, friends. Now, we're not going to cover absolutely everything in here. A lot of it was just kind of like, I'm planning to add stuff in the future to compare previous years and things like that. So I wanted to just kind of fill it in while it was there. So we're not going over like stuff like blessings or bonuses or, you know, things like that. But I wanted to keep it in there. Although we will be going over the vast majority. Like the vast majority. That said, there is a lot of data that we're going to be going over here, so I didn't want to get too into the weeds necessarily, but if there's something specific that this video does not cover that you are curious about, you have a question about, feel free to leave that question in the comments and I will try to answer it if I have the means or the time or what have you, because I can drill down deeper into this stuff, but I kind of wanted to keep it more of a top level analysis, just so your eyes don't glaze over with all of the stuff. So that said, let's just jump into it, shall we? So your 2019 banner breakdown. Let's hop in. Heroes released per month. This is the first one that I really kind of wanted to look at just to see like what the busier months were, you know. And I personally, going into this, I thought it would honestly be July, maybe June, because that's when we always have that summer banner overlap. Things are crazy, especially this year. But no, according to Debut, January took the cake with 16 released units that month. So there were two special banners. There was a normal banner, and then there was a mythic unit released as well. And we had some free-to-play units tossed in there too. The one thing IS did was they got really good at releasing Grail units, which you'll see me refer to Grail units as free-to-play units and things like that. So these numbers are going to include units that debuted from banners of new heroes, special heroes, legendary heroes, mythic heroes, as well as ones that are obtained through Grails, through modes like Tempest Trials Plus, Grand Hero Battle, stuff like that. So the TLDR of all that is, these are playable units that were new this year. 143 total for 2019. Like I said, January had the most. November came in second with 13, and you know, everybody else was pretty even for the, as you can see. There's not a whole lot of deviation. I think the lowest number we had was 10 in February, and then, you know, obviously 16 in January. For what that's worth, all the like the BST average for every unit is 161. Relatively, you know, reasonably high, I think. And you're gonna remember 161 because everything is kind of going to hover around that number for the most part. And that's one thing I did kind of want to keep track of, because BST, in my opinion, is kind of the best way to evaluate a unit, because a lot of great skills and things like that can be inherited. Base stats can't really be manipulated too much unless you're talking Dragon Flowers and merges, and even then, it's like a couple points. So the BST is kind of like the life force of a unit, which you can alter with, you know, special skills that you can inherit and things like that, within reason, of course. So the minimum BST was 143, that belonging to Picnic Jenny, and 185, which was a very recent edition of Winter Sothis. So, you know, 140, 180, 160, we're kind of in the middle, right? Just 20 above, 20 below-ish, around there. So the average is pretty even for the most part. I think they did a good job of balancing relatively BSTs throughout every unit that we ended up getting this year. And just a quick reminder, because we will be referring to BST a lot through a lot of different levels and variations and things like that. BST is always calculated at the 5-star level. So whether it's a 3-star or a 5-star, the BST is always going to be at the 5-star rarity. So if you put in enough effort, the BSTs are actually pretty solid. So speaking of rarity, let's look at heroes by rarity. So this is a breakdown again of every unit in the game, so that 143. So this is reflecting rarity upon debut, and what I mean by that is when the unit first appeared. So you're going to have some units like Brady, for example. He ended up getting demoted to a 4-star, but he debuted as a 5-star. He would be counted as a 5-star in this pool. Similarly, we have units that pop up in Tempest Trials or Grand Hero Battle that debut as a 3, 4, or 5-star. Whichever was the lowest possible at that time, that's what's counted. So if it was a Tempest Trials unit, for example, where you get a 4-star and a 5-star, in this pool they would be counted as a 4-star, just to be clear. So it's the lowest available rarity counted upon debut. There you go. So 21% released as below 5-star, which is kind of interesting. And that's not something to take lightly, I don't think. That's 1 in 5. 1 in 5 is relatively accessible, and that's going to include stuff like units like Bantu, which debuted as like a 3 and a 4-star, Grand Hero Battle units, Tempest Trials units, so your Grail units. That's going to include all of those as well. And I guess it's not really too surprising that 5-stars make up almost 80% or 4/5 of the total pool, since, you know, this is a banner evaluation kind of thing, and banners typically just have 5-star heroes. Although I will say, adding new 3 and 4-star heroes to the pool, very cool move. That's one of the things that I was most ecstatic about this year, just kind of looking back and thinking about it. I was like, you know what, that was a pretty nice move on IS's part, because they didn't have to do that, but they did. And it was also a way of getting newer units into the pool that people liked, like Valbar, for example. That was a cool thing that they did, and I personally appreciate that, regardless of what anybody else says. So, some BST info on this particular graph. The BST of 5 stars was 161 for the average. The average of 4 stars was 157, and the average of 3 stars was 163. So what that shows is that some of the better units that are more easily accessible or even free to play, that you could even plus 10 immediately if you had the Grails for, were available. And were better, base stat wise, than some of the exclusives if you put in enough effort for that particular unit. And I think that's kind of interesting. I think that's very interesting. Because a lot of times, like, you'll think, oh, well, it's pay to win, pay to play. Not if you put in enough effort into a unit. Now, granted, those resources are limited, of course. Grails exactly don't, grow on trees, so they say. So, there is a limitation to that. But it's nice to see that they didn't just make all of the 3 stars and the 4 stars terrible. You know what I mean? Like, that much I can appreciate. And I think, I think it's a good move. I genuinely do. Because my perception was going to be, oh, well, the 5 stars are definitely going to be, like, way locked high. And I mean, like, Winter Sothis, for example, the highest BST. They're, of course, going to, skew that 5-star a little bit higher. But for the 3-star to then still beat it is really freaking impressive. So for what that's worth, if you put in enough investment in a lower star unit and bump them up to 5-star, your BSTs are going to be pretty high. And of course, if you're willing to do that, you're probably willing to give them rare skills and things as well. So you could have a pretty solid team without being extremely, orb heavy. Demoted heroes. Let's talk demoted heroes. So first off, this one took a little bit of filtering. So this data is only going to include new heroes or heroes from new hero banners, I should say, and excludes any unit that is not eligible for demotion. So your legendaries, your mythics, your grails, those guys are obviously not in a pool. Special heroes too. They're not in a pool where they are available to be demoted, at least at this point. So it's really just new heroes, and it just counts the ones that were at a 5-star that went to a 4-star, because we didn't really have anything that changed for that for the most part. So 5 to 4-star, this is pretty much what we're looking at. This is another kind of interesting one, because again, my perception was, well, they don't really demote that often, but in reality it's 13% of the time they do, which is kind of like 1 in 10, which is roughly 1 unit from every other banner that shows up, or new heroes banner that shows up, again, just to clarify, which isn't bad, really. Like, that's kind of nice. So the demoted units, the BSTs, were at 160, and then the 5-star locked units, those were at 163. Kind of makes sense. Typically, they don't demote units that are really, really good, and they don't typically give really, really good skills to super low BSTs. So, for what you know what I mean? Like, they're not gonna demote a green who has special spiral and pretty reasonably high base stats. They're gonna do it for Echidna, who doesn't have that great of a base kit and maybe has, you know, an average base stat total. And that's kind of what these numbers show, so makes total sense to me. I'm not really surprised by seeing that, but I am, you know, like I said, 1 in 10, over 1 in 10 units get demoted, which, given that we've had, you know, 143 this year, again, that's not including all of them, but that's pretty reasonable, you know what I mean? I think it's interesting. Heroes by weapon type. Let's look at weapon type, shall we? Weapon type is it's one of my favorite categories because I always expect, like, it's all swords. You know what I mean? Like, whenever we see a legendary or mythic banner, it's like, oh, reds are completely occupied, blue is getting there too, so we must have a bunch of sword and lance units in the game. And we do. Like, you can clearly see that we definitely do. But of the 143 units in 2019, Tome was the weapon. 25 units were introduced with tomes. Second was swords at 22, and lances were third at 21 total units. Which you know, again, good for them. 2019 is the year of the tome, evidently. How fitting that we wrap it out with Legendary Celica as our final 2019 unit. Not counting the New Year's banner. Not looking at you West Coast. I'm East Coast, and I have to stay up late to get on that banner. So, just, I mean, it is New Year's, I guess, technically, so I would be up regard. Anyway, we ended with Legendary Celica, Year of the Tome. It's true. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Again, it's relatively pretty balanced for the most part. Staff was the lowest. They didn't have as many units. I think it was like 9, if I'm remembering proper. But the BST total for tomes was 153. Swords was 167, so a little bit higher. Lances was 164. Bows and daggers were both 157. Beast units came in at 160. Axe units were at 170. And then we had dragons, which, as everyone might imagine, pretty high. They had the highest BST average with 174. And then staffs, again, not that surprising. They had the lowest at 150. So dragons, then swords, then lances, and, or no, I'm sorry. Dragons, then axes, then swords, lances, beast units. That's kind of the descending order of highest BST per weapon type. Again, not too surprised. Those are always kind of the heavier ones. I honestly thought that beast units would be a little bit higher, maybe, but I don't believe that this takes into account when they transform. which does give them a slight stat buff. So for what that's worth, you know, they might be a smidgen higher, but probably not that much. But I don't think anyone's surprised. Like, we get a lot of dragon armor units, and their BSTs are just bonkers, and, you know, so I'm not at all surprised that they actually took the top spot there. Next up, we're looking at movement type, which is another personal favorite of mine. Again, this is from all 143 units. So infantry was first with 49 total. I know. The average BST for that was 165. Again, not too surprising given the number of sword and lance units that we have, which were also kind of around that number. The Flyers came in second with 37. They had an average BST of 156. Cavalries came in third with 36. They had a BST average of 152. And then Armors. Screw Armor Emblem, am I right? They came in fourth at 14.7% total with only 21 units this year. Which, when you think about it, we kind of have like 3 banners that are seasonal alone that are guaranteed to have armors on them. And that is, of course, Halloween, Winter, and Valentine's. So for them to have like a Hallmark 3-banner hold, where the majority of those units are going to be armor units guaranteed, and you're usually looking at 4 to 5 units per banner, for them to only have 21 total for the year, like, that's pretty respectable. Like, the IS did not flood us with armor like they did last year. I know I did a specific Armor Emblem exhaustion video last year that kind of explored like how much armor is really in the game, and it was kind of a lot. Like, it was genuinely kind of a lot. Comparatively, but now here we are. They're definitely balancing things out, which is super nice. And overall, I think this has really nice balance between stats and movements, because infantry has kind of like an average movement type deal, and then, you know, but they have like a higher BST. It's not top tier, but it's higher than Flyers and Cavs, who have, you know, relatively speaking, a more advantageous movement pattern. Flyers can avoid obstacles. Cavs can, of course, you know, get that extra space movement in. And then Armors have the highest BST but the lowest movement. And so they're also like the least populated this year for units. I think it's really balanced. I really, really do. I really, really do. Because I always think of Cavs and Flyers as kind of similar, and I think of Armors and Infantries as kind of opposites. And so I think they really balanced that really nicely. Top scores for me. I'm happy with what I see. Availability. Yay. Everyone's favorite. So these are units from Legendary, Mythic, Normal, Special banners, and of course Grails. Those are your free-to-play rewards type units. Majority of units came from New Heroes banners. Like almost half. That is a lot. That is a lot comparatively. The New Heroes took in a BST total of 164, again hovering around that average. Special Heroes were around 158. So your more pay-heavy associated units, they didn't have a higher BST, which is kind of interesting. Grails even had a BST of 159. Mythics had 161, as did Legendaries. And I specifically broke them up, even though I kind of lumped them in together. But I kind of wanted to see if they were different for the most part, and ultimately they weren't. They were pretty similar for the most part. But, you know, regardless, the normal pool heroes still had the highest BST, but Grails came in just over Specials and just under Legendary and Mythics, which I think, as a whole, is a pretty big integrity move, because again, those units are free, so they're giving away good free units for the most part. That's not locking stuff behind a paywall, and I can appreciate that. So again, they're just kind of showcasing that IS does understand what they're doing. You know what I mean? Like, they did a lot of stuff right this year, and I'm down with that. I'm here for it. Heroes by unit version type, and what I mean by version type is alt versus base. Holy hell. That is almost an even split. My dudes, can we appreciate the fact that we have a pretty even split separation between alts and base units being entered into the game? So just a quick explanation. Criteria for alts for me. It has to be an additional unit from the same game origin. So that little message that pops up on the hero main menu says what game they're from. They have to have a duplicate from that specific game where a relatively standard or base model has already existed. So for example, Katria from Shadows of Valentia, she is not an alt in this data set because her initial form is from Mystery of the Emblem. And so technically we only have one Katria from Shadows of Valentia. And her spring unit is also from Mystery of the Emblem. So technically, the Katria that we got this year is not an alt in this data set. And I kind of had to work it like that for reasons that I'll talk about towards the end of the video. Another alt criteria is it could be a debuting unit, but does not have a base model, but received like a seasonal type one. So an example of that would be like Grail, for example, right? So Grail, he's not in the game. He doesn't have a base unit, but he got a Valentinian attired one. So that's technically an alt for him, even though he doesn't have a base in the game. And another option would have been like a promoted model from the same game origin. So for example, Celica, Legendary Celica is an alt. Because we already had a Celica from Shadows of Valentia. Makes sense? Again, I had to kind of put this criteria on it to make the very last graph less complicated for the most part. So that's kind of where my thought process was with alts. Overall, I don't think it really makes a big difference. Katria was kind of like the only extreme example. I think everybody else would kind of agree that Valentine's Grail is an alt and not just a normal Grail, right? So there you go. So this means that of all the units introduced this year, half of them were not previously in the game. Roughly. And this doesn't include one-offs like Grail, Renea, Rolf, Dozla, Ileana, those that were seasonals, special heroes, but didn't have a base version in the game already. So the number is actually technically higher. If you're just talking about units that weren't in the game, the character didn't exist in Fae before, the number is actually higher for new existing characters. So the alt BST total came to 159. The base BST model came to 163. So again, just kind of re-emphasizing that fact that IS is not giving the highest base stat totals to paywall, like limited heroes. Now that's not to say they aren't going to lock really good skills behind that, but again, they are releasing a lot of skills through seals and other things like that. Your Grail units have some pretty good skills as well. So I think overall they're not really doing that. So these reflect normal and special BSTs within a point that you might expect, since we rarely have normal pool heroes who also have alts. So that being like Fallen Tiki. So again, it kind of skews, like it looks 50-50, but it's actually, in reality, new heroes that didn't exist in the game before, who don't have a base, like the new characters is over 50, which I think is a nice little nod here compared to previous years. Gender. Let's talk gender. Yikes. This is always a hotly contested topic. And I specifically put this in to cure my own curiosity. We always think of it as like waifu emblem, right? Like there's constant females in the game, and my perception of it was like I feel like every banner that's like 1 male to 4 females or 2 males to 3 females. And they always make the less desirable one the free unit that they give out. But in reality, it's almost 50-50. Like it's, you know, it's like 45-55. Like it's pretty close to being half. So we had females at 82 and males at 61 total. So again, just, you know, 20-ish unit difference. We do of course have more females, but for what it's worth, the female BST is lower at 159 average and the male is higher at 163. So your highest BSTs are actually male units, despite them not having as high a market share of the overall male to female units. So the other thing I kind of wanted to explore here was the type. So female units by type. Again, we do have a decent chunk of special, which is, you know, what you might expect. But look at the males, man. Like, overall, females are 34% special. Males are 26. But almost half of the units released are male, are normal. And then the females are close to 39. So maybe waifu emblem, like wallet waifus, maybe those do exist. They are slightly higher. Males do kind of dominate the normal pool a little bit more. Same with legendary versus mythic. But overall, grails are pretty similar, around 17-18%. So at least their free units are diverse, if you will. So that's kind of nice. Anyway, that's just a little extra that I wanted to throw in there when I was looking at it. I was like, oh, that could be curious. Choose Your Legends 3 Top 100. This is one that I debated putting in because it was going to take the most work. But I did it anyway because I wanted to compare for previous years and things like that moving forward. And so this has data from all 143 units. I went in and manually checked if they were in the top 100 from Choose Your Legends 3. It does not include, however, so it's not a total of 143. It excluded units like Ike, Lyn, Ephraim, those units that were previously Choose Your Legends winners and couldn't be picked again for Choose Your Legends 3. So, for what that's worth. The question I wanted to answer is, does IS actually listen to Choose Your Legends polls? And the answer is yes. Like, even though it's 42 to 57, overall, I think they do. Because of all the banners this year, almost half of them contained a unit where a Choose Your Legends winner in the top 100 was present. And that's a pretty big deal. So take Choose Your Legends voting seriously. That's the first one. And second, I think the main thing is here that Beast units maybe kind of skewed this because they did introduce Beast units, and one of the big things from Choose Your Legends was we want Beast units. And so I think they started adding those towards the end of year 2. I think we started off in January with our first Beast unit banner, and then I think we had like 3 in a row after that. And then we had another one in like June, I want to say. So they do listen to Choose Your Legends poll results. Did they make the most popular units stronger? No. The units that were not in the top 100 had a BST average of 162, and the ones that were had an average of 158. So for what that's worth, they're not necessarily playing favorites when it comes to that either, which I thought was kind of interesting. Next up, well, for real quick, Beast units. Of the Beast units released this year, we did in fact have 60% of them make it in that were in the top 100. So there were some that were voted on, or there were some that were added Beast units wise that were not in the top 100. But again, it was less than half. So I think those Beast units did kind of skew that a little bit. All right, so we've made it. We're almost at the 30-minute mark. Bless your heart for sticking through this long. But let's be honest. If you're watching this video, you're a nerd and you like this kind of stuff anyway. So let's look at heroes per game origin, and this is like the big one. All right, this is the the end-all representation of, did IS pass? Did they put enough of the units of the game that I like into Fae? And if they didn't, should I berate them with a bunch of like negative feedback? Aside from Genealogy's Legendary Juliet, every game, for the most part, had pretty okay representation. Excluding New Mystery, but that's just kind of a remake. Also Shadow Dragon, which had no representation, but I don't think anybody's upset about that. Heroes in Valentia took the top spots with 16. And I considered, this is that part where I had to look at Game Origin specifically with the Katria alt or not Katria alt. I didn't want to break it down by combined region because things got more complicated alt-wise because of that, and I didn't want to do that. But if I did, it would look a lot like this. Good job, Alib. You actually won. Oh dear. See, with this, it looks like, you know, Genealogy fans have a lot to complain about. And they still kind of do, to be honest. Jugdral, they still didn't do a great job. Thracia definitely skewed that number quite a bit higher. But for what it's worth, all the Marths and Awakening actually had the lowest number if you combine regions. Well, Sacred Stones as well. But look at that! Awakening had the lowest if you combine regions. You guys, can we not appreciate that everybody was like, I'm so sick of Fate's Awakening banners in Fae. And they listened. They listened, you guys. Even over here, like, Awakening wasn't doing that great. Like, they're around, I think that's like 6, I want to say. Dudes, I mean, come on. You gotta give a passing grade just for that. Am I right? Like, I like Awakening, but again, it was getting a little fatigue-ish. You know what I mean? Like, we had a lot of Awakening banners in year 2. But year 3 turned it around. I honestly thought once I combined these regions that Tellius would win it, but they didn't. It was a lead, so good job. All the Marths still down here. Second, tied for bottom, second. Fates, again, you know, it's Fates, right? I mean, the Hot Springs banner started off the year. Nobody liked that. I don't think they put any more Fates units in. Just because of that. Just because of that negative feedback that they got. But 3 houses coming in here, showing up with like 13, I think it was, 14. After only having like 2 banners for the most part. Pretty impressive. Pretty impressive. I was impressed, anyway. But there you go. That's what we got. So at the end of all this, do I think IS did a good job with my game this year? I call it my game because it's all of our game. I think so. I think so. Overall, I think they did. Obviously, you can't make everybody happy, but there were significantly less armors, which I think everybody's a fan of, and a lot more game representation diversity, which, again, I think a lot of people were happy about. I'm sorry, Genealogy and Shadow Dragon fans. Maybe next year. Maybe 2020. But I think they're taking better steps. Okay? I think they're taking higher steps, and that's what's important. So overall, this means that IS listens to our feedback. They do take Choose Your Legend seriously. So continue to vote in confidence with that and provide thoughtful feedback through the feedback submitter thing in the game. Whenever, you know, we feel like they're going astray, let them know. Send them feedback. Just shouting on Twitter doesn't accomplish anything, right? Send them feedback. Also, can we please get behind Marth and Choose Your Legends 4? That man has been robbed so many years now. Anyway, now that we have an Analt, I think we should all rally behind Marth, and that's likely what I'm going to be doing. Either way, this is what we have. This is what the data showed this year. Again, this is pretty top level. I could get more specific into some other things, but I didn't want to do that because this video is already over half an hour long, and nobody's going to watch this. So, If you don't want this video to kill my channel, please leave a like and subscribe if you have not. But I do really like breaking this kind of stuff down. It's interesting. It's interesting because I had a perception that was much more negative than what the data actually showed. And that's really cool. Because it goes to show that the game that I really like isn't as bad as I think it is sometimes. That's what I came to the conclusion of. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this was informative and you liked it. Again, if you did like it, be sure to like, subscribe, and all that nonsense. And if there was a question that wasn't answered that you might want to know about, leave it in the comments and I will try to answer it for you. Beyond that, friends, we're almost done with 2019. So here's the 2020, here's the Ana alts. And until then, I will catch you next time.